Our panel is going to be focusing on initiatives that offer areas of hope. But before I do that, I really think it's important to acknowledge that, from my perspective at least, regardless of its intents and its possibilities for affecting positive changes, edTPA is doubtless part of a larger context of political reforms that are systematically devaluating teacher unions, public education, teacher education, and higher education. And if I can just remind you of something that Barbara Mataloni said earlier today, that Teach for America core members do not complete edTPA before they go into classrooms and can therefore take jobs away from candidates who go through teacher education programs. That's an important aspect of this assessment, especially given that teacher education programs are going to be ranked and then cut eventually, according to Commissioner King, on the basis of how they do on assessments such as edTPA, as well as our ability to place candidates. And I think knowing that the bigger picture is really important. So now I'll get on to some hope, right? I promise that. The project I'm going to be talking about today is the edTPA Scoring Consortium. I want to also address the notion of critique and scholarship with respect to edTPA. There are two underlying assumptions with respect to this assessment. The first is, if not this, then what? How can we ever be a profession without this? Which erases generations and decades of scholarship and history that has been built on continuous improvement. The idea that I won't improve without an external assessment is, to me, personally and professionally insulting, demeaning. So I don't buy that. In addition, with respect to scholarship, I was recently involved in co-authoring a chapter that analyzed edTPA handbooks and what they say, what the language says about what it means to become a teacher. And in order to get that published, we had to get permission because we had signed a non-disclosure agreement, which is necessary in order to access the materials that we wanted to analyze to write this chapter. So we were told by our edTPA coordinator, who was wonderfully supportive in this process, that we needed to get permission from Pearson, well, from edTPA, from Scale. And she was able to secure from us a promise that as long as the work was valid and scholarly, we would be able to get such permission. So I followed up on that email and requested permission, which was denied. They said, no, you can't do this. And we didn't say we were going to be critical, we just said we were analyzing the language and the rubrics. So I expressed my outrage and copied the message that had been previously alluded to get this permission, at which point they backed down and said that, yes, we'll give you permission, but you have to send us the chapter. And we will read it and approve it and comment on it, which they did. Actually, that may have happened because I threatened to publish a redacted version of the chapter that had everything blacked out from the edTPA. But anyway, so its effect on our professional practice and academic freedom is real, not imagined and not unimportant. The second assumption with respect to critiques and projects such as ours is that if you are critical of edTPA, somehow you are pro-status quo and anti-improvement. And I reject that out of hand. As I said, our work is built on the idea of continuous improvement. That is what we do. And that is what we are committed to. So now, on to the good things. So what happened was we have been talking on our campus at SUNY New Paltz about edTPA and its ramifications, as well as Common Core and the higher ed profiles, all of which are going to be used to rank our programs, for 2.5 years now. And as part of that ongoing dialogue, we held a facilitated conversation about edTPA on our campus in fall 2013. At which point, the issues that you've heard today bubbled up, particularly with respect to equity and diversity of the teaching force. At SUNY New Paltz, we're a pretty selective SUNY institution, so while we know that probably 38% of candidates across the state are likely to fail if the field test results prevail, at SUNY New Paltz, we think that our failure rate will be lower, but we don't think that's okay, because we know that standardized assessments really assess privilege, and that using a standardized assessment such as this to perpetuate certification or to gain certification is certain to result in a teaching force that is whiter and wealthier than the students that our candidates will be teaching, and that is not okay with us. So it's part of the conversation. We talked about alternatives. The question that was posed this morning was also posed to us, that is, if not this, what? And one of the answers that came up was, besides what we're currently doing in our accreditation, is something like a scoring consortium. The idea that we get together with several institutions to talk about what we think students and candidates should be assessed on, and to try to ensure that the context, the social context, is taken into account, that relationships and communities of learning and communities of practice matter. And that was the task we set ourselves to do. The participants and their affiliations, as you can see, span across the state. They are also a combination of public and private institutions. We currently have 12 participants from 7 institutions. And participants, what we're trying to do is to navigate the challenge of resisting in ways that will not have negative effects on our students' ability to become certified in New York State. Of course, this is a wonderful, terrible parallel to what's happening in K-12 schools, right? So we were not going to accept the idea that we are trying to graduate educators who are critical and socially aware and committed to diversity if we weren't willing to model that ourselves. And that was one of the driving ideas behind our projects. So we're right in the midst of the project now. We are developing our own set of, they are not rubrics, they're scoring materials, and they involve big ideas such as teaching and learning, such as social context, and such as assessment. And underneath those big ideas are smaller ideas that get to possibilities of being demonstrated. What we're going to do is have each of our participants submit work from 5 student candidates, 5 teacher candidates, and then we're going to score each other's work in pairs, in teams, to see what we find out. And that's the gist of the project itself, which is what this says. We understand that there are limitations. We're using materials that students create for edTPA. We talked about other alternatives, but the idea of making students do more was not an option. So that is a key limitation, right? Students will be developing things based on edTPA, which has certain reductive, narrowing aspects, but we are aware of that limitation, and we're just going to work within it as best we can. We also know that there are challenges between our feedback, between possible discrepancies between our feedback and the feedback they get from edTPA. Right? As with the example that was given earlier today, where a student who failed was offered a job before he finished student teaching. Right? So these aren't new challenges, but they're challenges that we want to be upfront about with our students. The third bullet down here, we do not want this project in any way, shape, or form to be conceived as trying to create an alternative, like the ETS version of the edTPA. We don't think that teacher certification should be or can be standardized. We are 12 participants who have struggled with the big ideas and how to assess our student teachers and understand that work as such, as uncertain, as Barbara Manloni described it. And we also want to make sure that the teacher candidates who are participating with us find the information useful. So we've struggled with how we can give feedback that our candidates will find helpful as they enter the profession. So those are the things we're struggling with right now. We do have a public website, which is listed there, that you can, it's net, there's a net that you can't see, I don't know why, NewYorkScoringConsortium.net. And the thought I want to leave you with respect to our panel and this work is that individually, our actions matter. Our micro-resistances create ripples that create possibilities for change. It can feel sometimes that trying to resist is hopeless and overwhelming. The forces aligned against us are overwhelming, but they're not. The ripples matter, but when we join together, share ideas, and build solidarity, the possibilities are breathtaking. It is in working for something bigger than ourselves that we become fully human. It's working for something bigger than ourselves, for our students, as the teacher candidate mentioned earlier. That's what matters. So when these drops of water commingle, we can't predict the shape of our work, and that makes people who want to standardize very uncomfortable. Right? But we can predict that it will have more beauty, more power, and more potential than any of us alone. Okay? Thank you.